In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are going to be joined by Ben Pfeifer to talk about the 2024 NBA draft class and the Pistons' potential prospects at the 5th overall pick. Stay tuned for all of that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. There's another great way to support the podcast, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You'll hear more about FanDuel a little bit later. But we are joined by Ben Pfeifer. My goodness, I'm struggling to start the podcast. So hopefully we can get this thing going the right way. We are joined by Ben Pfeifer to talk about the NBA 2024 draft class. Ben, thank you for joining the podcast, man, taking time out. I just noticed this. He told me before we started the podcast, there is a 3-hour difference, so it is a little bit of a struggle to try. This was very last second, and you made time out of your day to come on the podcast despite the time difference, so I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. Benefits of working mostly like remote and from home is that I can move stuff around and do stuff like this, and I definitely wouldn't want it any other way. But yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk some prospects.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys can go follow him on Twitter at BJPF_. So follow him over there. Does great draft content. So let's go ahead and get into this. So the first, we'll eventually obviously get into like prospects specifically at number 5. But I want to ask you about is everyone's heard about it. I mean, it's been a major talking point of this draft class, I think, since like last year. At least from I've heard, and I'm not a big draft person, but I've heard a lot about it since last year. It's just like how weak this draft class is. Do you agree with that? Is this draft class weak? Do you think that's a little pushing it too far? Or do you think it actually is? Like I saw some people last week like talking about it being one of the worst, or maybe let me not say worst, but weakest draft class in the last like 30 years. Do you agree with that? Disagree? Where do you stand with this draft class?
I would say it's a pretty weak class. I think it's probably the weakest class since 2013 or about that. The main sources of weakness are, one, there just aren't really any super high level prospects. As the strength of most drafts will come from their like top prospects, the guys who we expect to be stars and usually are, you know, your Wemby, Luka, Zion, Paolo, Cade, Mobley, LaMelo, and all those guys. This draft doesn't really have that. There are definitely good prospects, and we'll get into that, but I do think it's accurate to say that, and then I think the depth is also pretty lacking. I think some of this is just going to continue to be a thing as a function of NIL and decision-making processes kind of changing for college athletes who might have been late first or second round picks, where now there's other considerations that might entice them to go back to college or delay going to the NBA. Just because this is a bad draft doesn't mean there aren't good prospects and there aren't going to be good players. And I think there are a lot of interesting, I think, upside bets at the top, but I think maybe they're not as safe or as, you know, certain as a typical draft. And there's some good older prospects as well who might not have much of a ceiling, but are probably going to be able to contribute. But it's certainly an interesting class that's very, very hotly debated. So
before we get into any one prospect, I also want to ask you this, because I had Ant Wright on the podcast about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And one of the things he said on the podcast when we were talking about the draft was that this is one of those drafts, if you identify someone in a weaker draft like this, once you identify that one person, that one prospect that you believe, okay, this is our guy, this is the person that we believe actually could be him, you should do everything you can to go get that person. Do you agree with that statement in regards to this draft, or do you think that's a little off base?
I think it depends on your circumstance and your situation. I think this could definitely be a good draft to trade around just because of how differently people are going to value guys. And I honestly could definitely see teams looking to maybe trade down and trade out of picks if, say, there's 7 prospects they view pretty equally, like might as well take some decision making out of it and get some assets. But yeah, I guess if you're really confident in a prospect in this draft, there's probably not going to be as many of those guys as there are in most drafts. So it could be a good idea to go get them if that's the case.
All right, so we'll dive into multiple prospects throughout this podcast, so everyone stay tuned. If you don't hear your favorite prospect immediately, I promise we'll get to as many as possible, because I know Pistons are sitting at 5. I've had so many listeners. Like, I kid you not, so many listeners. I've heard probably about 20 different names. Like, I've never.
It's crazy.
It's insane. I've heard so many different listeners say, "Hey, Koo, you got to check out this, but I think they could be good at 5." Literally, like 20 different names. It's insane. So I'm gonna try to get through as many as possible. But Ben, the Pistons are sitting at 5. Before we get into any one prospect, according to you, because I know I believe last year you put out one of your own mock drafts or your own rankings of prospects. I don't know if you've put one yet for this draft. But if the Pistons stay at 5, who do you think is the best option for them in your opinion? Based on how you think the draft's going to shake out, or I know it's unpredictable, but who are some names you think they should be looking at?
It's really, really tough, man. The Pistons have kind of backed themselves into a corner, drafting a bunch of prospects that might not necessarily fit together, even if they're all really great, and especially guys who aren't great shooters. I believe plenty in cage shooting, but Asar, Duran, Ivy, all have real shooting questions. So I feel like the Pistons and most Pistons fans would probably agree that drafting a shooter is priority number 1. But the problem with that is most of the best prospects in this draft are shaky shooters, which is just a really tough combination for them. But assuming like I think Sar is for sure going to be gone. Seems like Reed Sheppard is for sure going to be gone, even though I would have really liked him for the Pistons at 5. I honestly am kind of leaning towards Reed Sheppard being my favorite for them, even though it's another guard. But I think his ability to shoot, play off ball, be a guy who can play next to Cade, Ivy, and Asar and kind of get the best out of all of them, even though he might not have a crazy ceiling, I think he would help everyone on that roster. He's the main shooter. I think for the same reasons, I think Dillingham could be interesting, but also probably not as much because he's more of a creator and they already have so many guys who are going to do that. And then you're kind of getting down to either like older players who you're possibly reaching on, like Connects, or maybe more upsidey players like Modest Buzelis or Ron Hollins, who I really like, but both have credible shooting worries. So those are some names that immediately come off the top of my head. But there's, like you said, there's probably like quite a few more we could rattle off as realistic possible options, which is nuts, obviously.
Yeah, so this is what my plan is going to be. In the second segment, we're going to talk about specific prospects. We'll come back and talk about Reed Sheppard. There's a few prospects that I put out a poll asking fans who they wanted to hear most about. So I'll go through each one of those and we'll squeeze in as many as possible into the third segment as well. But to wrap up the first segment, I want to ask you about a prospect, the only prospect so far that I've done any kind of deep dive into, and that's Matas. Matas is the only one I've done an episode on. I've watched film on and had a scouting report on. So my feelings on Matas, I want to see if you agree or disagree with any of it. I feel like Matas has a lot of upside. I think a lot of his weaknesses stem from his strength, and that he must get stronger. But the problem I have with Matas is I feel like almost everything that boils down to him offensively, you have to believe in his shot. If you don't believe in his shot, I think it's going to be really tough for him at the next level. I think he has a nice handle for his size, not crazy handle, but a nice handle for his size. He flashes every now and then the ability to make some passes in a live, in transition off of a live dribble, which is intriguing. And I know there's a lot of people who have made a noise about his 40-inch vert or close to 40-inch vert at the combine, but for me, I didn't really see it pop like that in the film I watched. It never really popped. He's just I get the intrigue with him, and I understand the upside there. If you believe the shots there, if you think it's closer to what it was in high school than it was in the G League season. But I think Matas is an incredibly risky prospect. I'll leave off with this. I want to get your thoughts to close it up on Matas. I wrapped up the last episode. I talked about him saying, I don't know if I've watched I've only watched prospects for a year, so take that with a grain of salt. But like over the past year, I can't remember a prospect I watched that relied or took as many tough shots as he did. I feel like almost every shot I watched from him, it was a tough shot, and he's a fine tough shot maker, but he also takes a lot of tough shots. I think a lot of that has to do with his strength, but I'm just I see the upside, and I understand it if he's a pick, but I also am a little bit worried about him as well as a prospect. So just where are you at with Matas? Am I off anywhere in your opinion, or where do you stand with him?
I think that's mostly fair. I honestly agree that I like Modest a lot. I have him like top 7 on my board and have for a while, but I also don't know if he'd be a great fit for the Pistons because I guess like you said, he does need a lot of work. And I think I agree that the shot needs to be better, and a lot is going to hinge on that, right? He was not a great shooter this year. Better in high school. I think there's some intrigue that he was a really great mid-range pull-up shooter this year on small volume. He loves that little like Dirk fade or like spin into tough jumper with his touch. I think Modest, more than maybe any player in this draft, is going to be reliant on getting really strong to be really good. Where he has a really intriguing driving style where he's super fluid and he gets really low and he can get his shoulder below others defenders and like get into position to where if he had strength, he would be moving guys, but just doesn't because he doesn't have strength at this point. But at like legit 6'10 with his kind of like fluidity and coordination and length, I think there is some really intriguing creation upside. And my general draft philosophy is like to bet on that upside and to look for those like unique talents, those unique body types that maybe like we haven't really seen before or aren't sure what they can become. And I think Modest is certainly like that. I think it's definitely true that he takes a lot of contested shots, but I think that's true for basically all of the Ignite guys. And I think that setting brought pretty much everyone down, which, isn't to excuse Modest or Ron Holland or Tyler Smith or anyone there, but I think it's important context. And I also think Modest is a really intriguing defensive prospect too, because of his shot blocking. He is, again, will need to add strength to play on the interior, but he is an awesome rim protector with excellent timing. And I think he's a pretty good vertical athlete, like 40-inch vertical, like whatever. But the fact that he was able to be as good of a rim protector as he is with a tiny wingspan is impressive with his timing and his reflexes and his mobility. And I do think that he is a pretty solid vertical athlete, nothing crazy or anything, but I think he's good enough. So again, I think this is how most teenagers, right, have to develop a certain level of strength. But for Modest, I think it's so tied to his ceiling that it's like, if your team is convinced that your strength and conditioning can get this guy jacked, then take him and he's going to be a star. But if not, then he's probably not going to be very good. And I feel like for Detroit, they're probably not in a position to be gambling on a bet like that. But I would understand it if they did it because I think the upside is clear. But also, who knows, like if Langdon and they were going to want to make trades or move around some of their prospects, or who knows what's going to happen. But like, as currently constructed, I think it's probably difficult to make that work.
Right, I agree. And before we wrap it up, I do want to say that one of the things you mentioned, I did mention in the last podcast as well when we talked about him, is that he is not someone who relies on a lot of speed to create. He's going to rely on strength, except he doesn't have strength right now, like you said. So if he puts strength on, he's going to be one of those guys that creates separation and creates easy shots for himself by strength creation. So again, if the Pistons believe they can get him to put on like 20 pounds of muscle eventually, then hey, he could be something. But we'll see what happens. Yeah. When we come back, let's talk about Reed Sheppard to start off, because you brought up Reed Sheppard. I know you tweeted me and asked me about it. I haven't looked into him yet, but I've had a few fans ask about him. So when we come back, we'll talk about Reed Sheppard. But like I said, stay tuned for all that. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. I got the Boston Celtics winning in a sweep. I don't care if Porzingis is out. I still think they're going to win. But anyways, you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP, which I think is going to be a very heated discussion. It's a little bit more up in the air than maybe we thought beforehand, or to who's going to hit one out of the park. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. I've told you guys this many times a few years ago when FanDuel became legal in Michigan. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know not FanDuel, but betting became legal in Michigan. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I tried out FanDuel. I haven't turned back since. FanDuel is extremely self-explanatory, a lot of fun, and easy to use. So again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, so let's go ahead and start with Reed Sheppard. So I'm looking at Tankathon. I don't know, what other. I mean, I know there's other mock drafts, but that's the quickest one I can pull up real quick.
Yeah.
So I got Tankathon up. And they have Reed Sheppard going 3 to the Houston Rockets. He's a 6'3" guard, according to Tankathon. I haven't looked into him yet. He's going to be 20 years old. It seems like a 19, right about 20 years old on draft night. What's Reed Sheppard as a player? What is he as a prospect, and why should he be intriguing for the Detroit Pistons? I know as soon as Pistons fans hear, another guard, why would they take another guard? Why do you think that doesn't matter with this guy?
Yeah, so I was working on like a mock draft for my YouTube channel and was really struggling with who to give them.
Go ahead and plug your YouTube channel if anyone wants to check it out.
For sure, yeah, it's just my full name, Ben Pfeifer. We're gonna be live on YouTube during the draft, so if y'all are interested in that's gonna be a super fun time. But point being, I'm working on a mock draft for my YouTube channel, and I'm thinking, the more I think about it, the more, if he's available, he very well might not be there if Houston or someone likes, or San Antonio likes him ahead of them. But if Sheppard falls, I think though he is a guard, he is probably the best option in terms of fit and ceiling. With this draft the thing is, there is no perfect fit. There is no like young upside 3-and-D wing. That just doesn't exist. Either you're going to take someone who is younger and a better prospect, but maybe doesn't fit, or you're going to take a worse prospect who fits. And I generally don't endorse reaching that much for a worse prospect. But I think Sheppard, despite being a guard, fits really well. Sheppard's main issues to me are that I just don't see very much upside with him, given some of his size and athletic concerns. He's not a dynamic creator, and he struggles defensively because of that size and some of his movement concern. But what Reed is really amazing at is playing off the ball, playing a complementary role. He's an awesome shooter in transition, off the ball, can pull up when defenses go under. Such a smart connecting passer, like transitions, hit ahead, secondary pick and rolls, passing the cutters. And I think he ideally is like a perfect third guard with Cade Cunningham and or Asar and or Ivy. And I think he works regardless of what the Pistons choose to do. And I think that's going to be an important thing, is them to get a player who's malleable, who's flexible, who they don't need to like tailor their stuff for, because they already have so many players where they're, a guy like Asar or Duran or Ivy, who's I think are really great and have big upsides, but you kind of have to tailor them in a certain way to succeed. Whereas I think Reed could be awesome playing as a 2-guard next to Cade, as Cade's size and defense will make up for that. I think he'd be awesome playing next to Ivy and Asar, complement their athleticism with great spacing and decision making. I think he'd be a great pick and roll partner with Duran, and also just having a spacer there helps. So I think if we're trying to think of like, you have your 4 main prospects, which prospect is going to slot in to that quote unquote starting 5, I think is the wrong approach, because that player doesn't really exist where the Pistons are picking. But I think Sheppard, while still being young, having upside, is a really safe bet to be an offensive contributor, regardless of what the Pistons choose to do, whether they want to make a trade, whether they don't want to make a trade, whether they want to shake things up. He's going to be constant and he's going to be effective. And I think that should be one of the highest priorities for Detroit, even if like fit isn't perfect. And fit is fit changes so fast. Like 1 year, a position of need might not be because of retirements or injuries or trades or development and inverse. So that's why I like Reed for the Pistons at 5.
So I think one of the things you mentioned so again, I haven't looked into Reed at all, but one of the things that you said that instantly perked my ears and had me interested is your point about the Pistons having so many players that they have to tailor so many things to. and it makes it incredibly hard to build a roster. It makes it really hard to build a functional lineup, not even a roster, a functional lineup with all of them on the floor. I mean, the Pistons lost 28 in a row, 27. We watched it happen. And that's been one of the things I've mentioned on the podcast is that they have to construct this roster in a way that best fits their one constant, which is Cade. And it seems like, from what I understand and from what we've read, again, for all my listeners, this is not Kuka Hill's opinion, even though my opinion agrees with this. This is just based off what I've heard and what it seems like through from the writings we've gotten or the articles we've gotten, is that it seems like there are two constants as of right now is Cade and Asar. It seems like Asar is valued really highly. Now, maybe Trajan comes in and he's completely flipped it all up. So that's why we'll just stick with the one constant is Cade. And the ability to have somebody that can fit if Trajan decides to, we're going to move Ivy. We're going to move Duren. Okay, well, Reed can fit that. Oh, we're going to keep Ivy. We're going to keep Asar. We're going to keep Duren. Okay, he can fit that. We're going to move one of them. Okay, he can fit. Having a guy that you draft that doesn't need the entire roster to flip just to be able to be used. Because, look, I love Asar. I had Asar going 5 before, and I was laughed at on the Lockdown mock draft. I still hold that against you guys. I'm not going to lie to you. But I was laughed about it, and they end up drafting him. But I'm not going to sit here and lie. You have to tailor stuff to him to get the best out of him. You can't just throw him on the floor and expect him to do stuff. And we saw that last year offensively. They can't. I don't know if they can afford to have another guy like that you have to have. And the same thing with Ivy. The same thing with Duren. I don't know if you can afford to do that again with the prospect. So that is what made your argument for Reed pretty interesting to me. And I'm looking forward to getting into him now.
And I think the fact that the Pistons, obviously Cade has improved, but I think Cade was going to be good regardless of where he went. It seems like their track record of player development recently isn't stellar, right? I think it's fair to admit that a guy like Reed, who I think might have a more limited ceiling, it's like you put Reed on an NBA floor tomorrow, and he's going to be a useful offensive player. I think he has the ceiling and there's room to grow in weaknesses, but he's someone who doesn't need the ball. You don't have to run plays for him. You don't have to think too hard. He's going to be good. He's going to make smart decisions. He's going to make basic plays. He's going to hit threes. He's going to get steals and blocks and stuff. And I think that for a team in transition like the Pistons with a lot of talent that is uncertain, having that certainty and stability while also, not reaching for an old type prospect who is probably very limited while still maintaining a guy like Reed who's young and could maybe exceed a ceiling that I think he has is just a good marriage of everything that they kind of need pretty much.
All right, so before we wrap this segment up, I want to hear about one more prospect from you. It doesn't seem like, now I could be wrong, but reading the tea leaves, I don't think you're going to be high on this player for the Pistons, but I know Pistons fans, a lot of them love him. He led the poll when I asked on Twitter and on YouTube who they wanted to hear about next. He led both polls. He kind of matches what you're talking about in an older prospect that, maybe has a limited ceiling, but it's Dalton Connect. What do you think about him? Obviously, like I said, I've only dove into Matas yet so far, but I do understand so far that Dalton is a sniper, it appears, and he's a wing. That's all I know about him so far. I haven't done any digging into him yet.
I would say that's accurate. Yeah.
So that's all I know about him so far. But like I said, reading the tea leaves, I don't know how much of a fan you'd be of them picking him at 5. So do you think the Pistons should be considering him at 5? What type of player is he? Just give a brief explanation on him before we move on to the next segment where we dive into any more prospects.
Yeah, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm not a huge Connect guy, and I don't think picking him at 5 would be wise. But I understand the logic for sure, and I think it's similar to what we were talking about with Reed. That Connect is going to shoot the ball. He's going to come in. We know what we're getting from him. But differences between Reed and Connect, right? Connect is going to be 23 or 24 in his first season, and a lot of older rookies are risky because we don't exactly know how much more they can realistically improve. And I think, again, for a team like the Pistons, it's not like they're, a Connect away from contending or they're a wing shooter away from being a good playoff team, right? No, they're still, unless all of their guys make big leaps and something big happens, who knows? But it seems like they're probably pretty far away from actually being ready to compete, and the roster is going to need a lot of changes. So I think the fact that this roster is going to look a lot different whenever the Pistons are, whether that's 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, like whenever they're next contending, it's going to look a lot different than it looks today. And I think drafting for fit and connect for fit is kind of just like a short-sighted way that I tend to not really agree with in my philosophy, right? Just because the draft is such a long-term game. And while I think it's true that connect would come in and be really effective, I think it would be more smarter to take a chance on a guy like Reed, who I think could really end up being like a top 40, 50 player in the league versus someone like Connect, who he's a really great shooter off the ball and on the ball. He can pass a little bit. He's a solid athlete, but it's a hard sell for me to take someone who's like a 23-year-old who had one breakout year, right? Like he wasn't this dominant player before he came to Tennessee. He was good, and I think it's good that he improved, but this is his first year of really dominant production like that. And I think you can certainly make a compelling case that part of that is because he's older and bigger and stronger and more physically and mentally developed than his competition, and that's going to go down at the NBA. I see Connect as like a Grayson Allen type, where he's like a really good like third offensive guard who's going to be great hitting jumpers and secondary playmaking and eating off of the gravity of a guy like Cade, which I think would for sure work. If the Pistons were to like trade down and take Connect, I think that would be good. That would be better, but it seems like Connect is viewed pretty highly in league circles. But just from my personal philosophy, even at a draft this week, like I said, I think there are good upside, solid upside bets like a Sheppard or even like a, some other guys we might talk about. But like I said, I get it. And I've like in some of the mocks I've done for work, I've given them Connect. So I think it's certainly a possible thing. I wouldn't love it, but I would understand it. Well, like it wouldn't be like the worst thing in the entire world, but it wouldn't be my first or second choice.
So we're going to move on, and we'll talk about some of the prospects coming back. Ryan Holland, I want to get to because he's another one that a lot of Pistons fans seem to like a lot. I've had Donovan Clingan. I don't know if he's going to be there. It's a lot of mixed reporting. We'll talk about him a little bit, but I do want to wrap up by saying what you were talking about. It's tough. The Pistons, I think, are in a very, very tough position because you do want to draft for someone who will fit with Cade. You do want to draft for someone who, again, like I just got done saying, you don't have to tailor your whole team towards. But then also, like you said, you're also very far away right now, at least right now. So drafting for short-term gain versus long-term gain seems like a little like bleep backwards. It doesn't seem it's going to be tough. It's going to be interesting to see, and they may not even keep the pick at 5. So it's like, exactly, who knows,
right? Like, who knows what's going to happen at this point, really? Like,
I seriously, I feel like the Pistons are one of the teams that everyone's looking at, and it's like, what are they going to do in this draft? Like, are they even going to stay in this first round? Are they going to trade this pick for Brandon Ingram? Are they going to go after like one of these? Like, what's going to happen? So I don't think anyone really has a good grasp for anything right now. So it's all over the place. So I get it. But when we come back, like I said, we'll touch on Ron Holland, Donovan Clingan, and maybe a few more if we can fit it in. But stay tuned for all that when we come back. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get on your way to being your best self. We all carry around different stressors, whether they be big or small, or maybe a bunch of small things that you're deciding to hold in instead of letting it out. When we keep them all bottled up, it can really start to affect all of us negatively. Trust me, I've been there. Therapy is a safe space, my goodness, to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work things through whatever is weighing you down. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. If you're not vibing with the therapist you can switch just like that with BetterHelp. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So let's go ahead and get into this next prospect that This is a prospect I'm not sure is going to be there at 5. I've seen a bunch of different reporting on it, and that's Donovan Clingan. If the Pistons were to be interested in him or were to draft him, I think that would be quite. I think a lot of things may fall from that, like what's going on with Duren, then what's happening there. But we don't have to get into all that. Let's just talk about Clingan as a prospect. Where do you think of Donovan Clingan, and do you think he would make sense in Detroit?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, drafting Clingan would probably be an indication that they're just out on Duren and planning on moving him. Whether or not I agree, I think that would probably be a little bit short-sighted. But regardless, I don't think you draft a non-spacing true 5 if you have confidence in Duren. And that's what Clingan is to me. Like, he's a very traditional drop big. I think he's a pretty good prospect. I think the noise about him getting top 2 or 3 buzz is a little rich for me, just because I don't think the ceiling is really there for him. But Clingan is an excellent defender. He was one of the best rim protectors in college basketball. He's a fantastic shot blocker with his height and length and timing and reactions. And he's gotten better as a mover as well. He's more comfortable this year, stepping out into the perimeter and getting in the faces of smaller players and bothering them. Even though he's never going to be a great perimeter defender, ground coverage guy, he's going to do what he does well. He's going to be a great drop big. He's going to protect the paint. He's going to be sound and solid. And I think of sound and solid is how I describe it on both ends. Offensively, I have more worries where I think he's a good screener. He's a solid passer. He can make structured reads within an offense, right? Just making passes to cutters or kicks out from the post to shooters, simple stuff. He's got solid touch, but nothing really much beyond that outside of just finishing, screening, some passing, rebounding. So I think he, in theory, would be a nice fit with Cade if they just want to get rid of Duren, if they don't like Duren and they want to try again at center. Cade would be an incredibly good pick and roll partner with him. He's obviously an amazing lob passer, amazing interior passer in general. And I think Clingan's solid decision making would definitely help the Pistons. I think he'd probably be able to be at least solid, whereas a guy like Duren, even coming out, was a pretty much an upside pick, the youngest player in the draft. We knew it would take time for him to be competent, whereas Clingan is probably one of the safer guys in this draft in terms of, at least in terms of defense, that he's going to come in and be useful. So I think it would be Duren aside, I think it would be a solid pick if he fell. Nothing really special. Like I said, that's kind of how this draft is. It'll be all right. There's nothing special about it. Just, nothing to get crazy excited about. But I think that would indicate we just want to take good talent. And I think that's generally good process, even though I probably don't view Clingan as highly as people in the league and the mainstream do.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it a lot on the podcast. One of the main things, and I talked about this on the last episode with James Edwards III, the athletic beat writer for the Detroit Pistons. It seems like that the Pistons, there was a lot of things wrong with the Pistons, obviously, this past year, a lot of things. But it seems like, it seems like the main thing that's really been a thorn in their side that has really off-put them the most, and again, this is just my read on everything, it seems like their defense from the 5 position really upset them, or really was one of the main things that really off-put them. The fact that they had no defense from that position, how bad Duren was this year, I think there's a legit argument some could make that he was worse this year than his rookie year. He was really bad this year defensively. I think that has really, again, I don't know any other word outside of, off-put some of the front office guys. And again, Trajan just got in here. I know we haven't gotten a press conference yet. I know that's, we'll talk about that in the next episode, but maybe he feels completely different than everyone else, and it doesn't matter. But that just seems to be the read on the situation. They've been linked to Nicholas Claxton. They've been linked to Hartenstein. They've been linked now to Clingan. It seems like they really want to get a defensive 5 in the building. So if they think that Clingan is that guy, I could see it. But like I said, I think that then has a trickle-down effect of something either has already happened with Duren in the next 16 days or something's going to happen with Duren in the days afterwards. So we'll see what happens with that.
Absolutely.
So next prospect I want to talk about real quick before we wrap up. And look, guys, like I said, there's like 20 prospects. I'm looking at this tankathon, and there's a guy here down at 21 you guys wanted me to ask about, and it's impossible for me to get through everybody. It's just too many prospects. But the next one that you guys voted the most was Ron Holland out of the G League. What are your thoughts on Ron Holland? From what I understand, just base level, it's kind of like what you said at the very beginning of the podcast. You're either going to get somebody who can't shoot, has questionable shooting, but is good everywhere else, or you're going to get somebody who can shoot but they can't really do anything. You're really going to find someone who immediately is going to be able to do both. So from what I understand, Ron Holland doesn't have that great of a shot. That's really all I know about him so far, without getting in. So what are your thoughts on Holland?
Yeah, I'd say that's true, is that Holland would be a pick that maybe doesn't fit perfectly with the talent that the Pistons have accrued, but would be a signal that's like, we're taking the best talent on the board come hell or high water, and we'll figure it out later. I think Holland is fantastic. I think he's definitely one of the players I think is the biggest gap between like quote unquote like draft Twitter and like scouts on the internet versus the league, where you see reports of him like falling out of the lottery. Whereas like, I think he's a top 2 guy in this class, as do a ton of people on like, draft Twitter and stuff. There are a ton of people who have him number 1. And I think that's honestly totally reasonable. He maybe isn't safe as others, like you said, because of that jumper. It wasn't like the worst jumper you've ever seen, and he's like willing and was willing to take off dribble stuff. I don't think the jumper is so broken to the point where it's like not worse than a guy like Jimmy Butler or Jaylen Brown or Pascal Siakam or Kawhi from 3 at the same stage. But Ron is, to me, the best athlete in the class. He is an unbelievable explosive athlete with the burst to get downhill whenever he wants, finishing above the rim with crazy dunks in the half court, getting up for blocks, can flip his hips and hang in midair on the defensive end. And I think his upside is extremely high. He is an elite driver, elite slashing creator. His handle got a lot better this year. He's so elite, dislodging guys with his strength and his explosion and getting all the way to the basket. I think he's an underrated passer too. Takes a lot of questionable shots, but I think so much of that is his age and the fact that he is like the primary initiator on a really terrible basketball team that does not really influence good habits. This is Ron's first year in this role, really. In high school, AAU stuff, in FIBA, he was like an energy big type. So this is his first year really as like a full-time perimeter creator, and I think he's made great strides as a handler, a decision maker, a shooter, and then defensively, I think he has like bona fide all defense type upside as like an Isaac Okoro type wing who's just going to be a shutdown defender on the ball and is going to wreak havoc off the ball with his shot blocking and his playmaking. Needs some seasoning in terms of technique and fouling and being overly aggressive at times, but I think that's extremely common for 18-year-old prospects. I think Ron at 5 would be just good value based on my evaluation of the prospects. And even though I think similar to Modest, it's not a super clean fit with the talent you have, right? Like if the Pistons are set on this group and they want to draft someone or acquire someone who is going to maximize the group they have, then Holland's probably not the direction that they should go. But if they're
I can make it easy. Let me make it easier for you, because let's go ahead and operate in this sense then, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. Just Cade. I think that's all that matters right now.
Just Cade, absolutely, yeah.
So do you think he can play? Those two guys can fit together and play well together?
100%. I think Cade is having a playmaker like Cade makes it so good for like other players, because a guy like Cade can get Ron into easier spots. I am actually today I'm working on tracking all of his half court rim attempts. And the thing that you notice about a guy like Ron is basically everything is tough, self-created shots. There's no one making his life easier. There's no one doing it for him. Everything's on his plate. And I think Cade would do a lot to take that off of his plate, get him easier shots, attacking closeouts and stuff. And I think Ron can also attack off of the dribble, draw in the defense, and hopefully get Cade some easier shots too. So yes, I think those two would be a great fit together. So from that perspective, then yeah, all in on that.
And the only reason why, for everyone listening, because I already know there's a few Ivy stands that are going to flip out that I said that. The only reason why I'm saying that is because it's a very legit possibility in this offseason that it's possible that Cade's the only guy that sticks around. Like it's possible they move on from Ivy. It's possible they move on from Durant. I don't think they're going to move on from Asar, but maybe Trajan isn't a fan of Asar. The only guy that's locked down long term, I mean, we just got the report last week. He's getting that max. He's getting the rookie max. So, and like, he's the only one that really matters at this point. Like, I'm sorry for everyone who's a stan of Asar, Ivy, Durant, but like right now, it seems like the only guarantee you have long term is Cade right now. So that's why I asked that question, because if they do move in that area of moving off of those guys, I think then this pick has to fit with Cade. Then if that's the route they go, just say it. We're at 40 minutes. We gotta wrap it up. But I just want you to say a name. If I asked you the most unorthodox or off the a little bit a wild card pick that you could see for the Pistons at 5, that maybe isn't high on the draft boards, that maybe, other people aren't as high on, but you think could really pop in the right way, in the right situation long term, who's that one name that you would say?
Oh man, that's a really interesting question. Totally on the basis of getting a guy to pair with Cade. We're ignoring all of the other fits and stuff and all of the other considerations. Oh man, I think I'll say Devin Carter could be interesting. Another like older guard who's like a perfect off guard type. I could see maybe Langdon is like, we want an established guy and we're just going to take the guy who we know is going to be good. Either that or in the opposite direction, they'll take Tijon Salo, who's like a super raw 18-year-old French wing. So I'll say one of those two guys is my out of the box ish type.
Fair enough. Appreciate you coming on the podcast, man. Again, this was very last second. You made time for me immediately. I appreciate it a ton, especially at this part of the off season with the content, daily having to come up with something, you helped me out a lot. Appreciate it.
Sure. For sure.
Make sure you guys follow him on Twitter at BJPF_. Obviously go follow him and subscribe to his YouTube channel, Ben Pfeifer. Appreciate you coming on again. I appreciate all of you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Till next time, peace out.